Hi, this is Dr. Terry Walls. I'm here with my very good friend, Garett, and I want you to know that he is a Walls Protocol sponsor. And doing these interviews are really a terrific way for me to introduce you to the products and services that I believe in and that I use every day as part of my healing journey and supporting my goal of thriving to 120. Garett, welcome. And why don't you tell us just a little bit about your background and how you got into electrical stimulation?
Thank you, Dr. Walls. It's a pleasure to be here. Love getting to catch up with you and just absolutely love the work that you're doing and the impact you are making. So really, thank you. And my background is a blend of engineering and neuroscience. I did graduate work, was actually in a PhD program. I decided to take a leave of absence to launch our product, but I was grateful to have found an area where I can combine, those academic interests in engineering and neuroscience along with my passion for the human body. And I first really kind of, got on this path during an experience I had where I was playing ice hockey in college and I had an injury, and like many like many of the greatest blessings, it actually started with with a big challenge. And I met a doctor who introduced me to functional neurology and direct current. And functional neurology is interesting because my experience in sports to that point was all about the tissue, the thing that was broken, the tendon, the ligament, the muscle, the bone, whatever it was. And this was a paradigm shift where we focused more on the neurological response to the injury and trauma and how the nervous system will shut off some muscles, create tension in others, and how that creates pain, how that delays the healing process. It can be as simple as like that tension where the nervous system is guarding and protecting, creates tension and pressure that reduces blood flow, for example, and can slow down the body's ability to repair. And so focusing at this level and then using direct current. I had an injury where I was supposed to have surgery, be out for a few months, and my ligaments healed on their own, and I avoided surgery. And it was cool to recover faster. Yes, that part was great. But what really got me excited, what really changed my life was to find something that actually made sense from first principles. I was a physics major. I was set to go to engineering school, and to find something that really made sense at that level, that's where it just so resonated with me and where I felt called to share this work with as many people as I could. And so using these neurological principles first in the sports medicine realm, working with athletes, people more kind of like myself, because we're using so many neurological principles and techniques, and that was kind of the whole thing. We very quickly started working with neurological patients as well, patients with neurological injuries, neurodegenerative diseases, and saw just some really wonderful, transformative outcomes, which, of course, I'm excited to talk with you about here. But that's been in many ways even more fascinating, even more really rewarding, humbling, gratifying, amazing.
Now, many people are familiar with my story of using electrical stimulation to speed my muscle recovery. But in addition to motor weakness, there are three other really big problem areas for MS patients that do not respond at all well to treatment: spasticity, pain, and cognitive decline. And I'm really curious, Garett, is there any role for electrical stimulation to address any of those three?
Yeah, fortunately, all three, and we can take them one by one. But starting with spasticity, so the Neubie actually, so our device here, Neubie neurobioelectric stimulator. It's a direct current as opposed to alternating current. It has some really unique effects on the nervous system. It's actually FDA cleared for reducing spasms or spasticity. And part of how it does that is, well, in order to understand that, we just kind of have to set the stage here. So our brains and nervous systems send signals to muscles, and there's essentially two signals they can send. They can send a signal to contract or turn on, and then send a signal to relax and turn off. And both of those are active signals that are being sent. And in a case of spasticity, there essentially is a signal of too much on and then not enough signal to turn off. And of course, an oversimplification, but I promise it'll be a useful one when we get there. So the cool thing about this type of electrical stimulation that we're using is that a lot of, most applications of electrical stimulation, like people listening to this who have experience may have used FES, functional electrical stimulation, where it's about getting muscles to contract. If there's motor weakness, that can cause muscles to contract, and there's some benefit in that, but you typically have to be dependent on the machine to do it for you. Whereas with this, we can change the settings and harness the unique effects of direct current to bypass a lot of those contractions, actually preferentially relax muscle. But the way that it does it is very interesting, where what we're doing is actually creating this sensory input that actually improves proprioception. And we can explain what proprioception is for a moment here, but what we're doing is basically helping the brain see that muscle more clearly so that it can better understand, oh, hey, there's this imbalance. There's too much contraction signal, not enough relaxation, not enough turn, too much on, not enough off. And when the brain more clearly sees where that muscle is and what's happening in the current state of that muscle, it's better able to send that signal to turn it off. So one of the things that we would do in a treatment, for example, is actually scan around, take one of the electrodes and scan around on the body. And what we're doing is finding where there might be hypersensitivity or guarding or these excessive contractions in the nervous system. And when we stimulate that area, we're sending more signal from there, increasing that proprioception, that word I'd mentioned just a moment ago. Mm-hmm. And so proprioception, a good way to conceptualize it is to imagine that everyone listening here, imagine that you're in a room and there's a table and chairs or different things on the floor here, and you're trying to walk around that room. So if your eyes are open, you can walk around the room and you can see where obstacles are, and you can move around them very easily. And shouldn't really be any like risk or threat or anything that unusual there. And so that's having a good sense of proprioception. So proprioception is the brain's ability to see the body, to know where the body is in space, to know that my arms are here instead of here, to know exactly where they are. Very fine-tuned, precise communication, line of communication, to know exactly where the various parts of the body are in space. If proprioception is decreased or diminished, it's like walking around that same room with the chairs and different obstacles around there, but doing it with your eyes closed. So imagine for a second, please don't try this if you're in an unsafe environment, but imagine if you're walking around that room with your eyes closed, instead of walking around smoothly and gracefully, you're going to be taking smaller steps. You're going to be very guarded. You're going to be feeling around with your hands to make sure you're not running into anything, kicking, taking smaller steps, making sure you don't trip over anything. And so when you don't have a good proprioceptive sense, your brain causes a lot more contraction and limits your movement to protect you, because you can't see where these different obstacles or threats are. And so a similar type of thing happens there. And when you create these inputs, when you take advantage of the ability of the direct current to increase proprioception, that neuromuscular reeducation, it often helps people get to the point where they being their brain and nervous system, can now start to send more of those off signals there and start to balance the activity in that area. And sometimes it's faster, sometimes they can do it. They just needed to reconnect and it happens quickly. Sometimes it takes longer because it's actually a matter of triggering remyelination or repair or tapping into the power of neuroplasticity to make long-term changes, where you need that direct current electric field, that electric charge gradient to help stimulate the healing over time. So sometimes it's short-term and functional, sometimes it's long-term and you need the functional support, but it's more like structural, software and hardware changes.
Okay. So let's talk about pain. Pain is another area that people can have immense amount of pain for MS and neuroimmune, with polyneuropathies, a wide variety of chemo or radiation neuropathies, and MS can have a lot of pain with it. Does the Neubie have any role in diminishing pain?
It does. And pain is such an interesting topic of conversation. We've actually learned so much about pain in the last 30 years or so. It used to be thought that we had pain signals, pain receptors in the body, and when you triggered one of those, it was just automatically the experience of pain. And we now know that it's a little more nuanced, a little more complicated than that. So we do have nociceptors in the body. We have receptors that perceive threat, but there's more that goes into the experience of pain, because the experience of pain is actually, it's an output signal created by the brain, and it's the brain's way of saying, stop that, don't use that area, or do something different. It's the brain's way of saying, change your behavior. And there's so many interesting components to that, that if I may just kind of help set the stage with some of them. So we often think that pain means damage, and damage is going to trigger pain. We often think there's this clear connection there, but there are so many cases where that's not true. There's examples of 50% of people in their 50s who don't have any back pain at all. If you look at their MRI of their spine, they'll have issues with their discs, issues with their facet joints, things that we think would cause pain, and yet they don't experience any pain. So damage or structural things does not always equate to pain. And then people may have pain without any damage at all, and that's because pain is the brain's way to cause people to change behavior. So sometimes people will have pain in an area and it will kind of ebb and flow. It's not just like, oh yeah, I move it there and it hurts. Sometimes it'll kind of come and go. And there's interesting part about phenomena, interesting kind of model of pain called the biopsychosocial model of pain. So biological, psychological, and social model of pain, where because the brain only has so many things, like we talked about, proprioception. If it's as if you're walking around the room with your eyes closed, the brain is going to limit your movement. It gets you moving slower, kind of more contained and confined and stiff, to prevent you from going out and injuring yourself or running into something. So pain is also a response just like that. And it can happen in response to even things that non-physical influences that shouldn't hurt us. So like if you're someone listening to this, maybe has the experience of going through either a rough time at work, or like the fear of losing one's job, or the having issues at home and the fear of losing a family member, or breaking up a relationship or something like that. Like those create a perception of threat at a very deep level of the brain, because if we lose our job and lose the ability to provide for our family, that could literally mean like getting kicked out of our home or starving, or things places where our brains will go. And yet if your brain wants to create a change, it doesn't have I'm at risk of losing my job muscle to trigger pain there. So it's going to use pain, but it's going to trigger that in an area, a well-rehearsed existing pain pathway. So it's going to go into that same elbow or hip or low back, or wherever someone has the experience of pain. So there's this interesting disconnect there. And of course, this can all be exacerbated by MS and autoimmune conditions and things like that, because there's already going to be an elevated perception of threat when the immune system is so high. So it's a matter of finding where this perception of threat is coming from, where these hypersensitivities are in the nervous system, and sending those signals at a level where the brain can start to see, oh, okay, I can understand that, and actually teach the brain to downregulate that perception of threat, teach the brain to calm down. So there's a very interesting strategy for how to do that, even if the source of pain is more psychological or something that couldn't hurt, that should something that quote unquote shouldn't hurt. Being able to scan around in the body and see where the brain is guarding and holding onto that hypersensitivity, and then gradually introducing input into that area. It's sort of like desensitizing that pathway is a very powerful process, very powerful way to downregulate the experience of the perception of threat and the output of pain.
So I want to see if I understand the process here. So I come to you and say, Garett, my back and my hip is really bothering me. You and your team do a body scan with your electrodes to figure out where my hypersensitive areas are. And then we design a program where I'm using the direct current Neubie to stimulate those hot spots. And over time, my brain responds. And what we discover is my back pain and hip pain diminish, even though there's really been no change necessarily in my muscle strength. But is that a fair description of how the pain is reduced?
That's a fair description of a common pattern. There certainly are times when, someone sprains an ankle, or someone is in a car accident and they clearly just have a traumatic impact. And there's times where, there is physical damage, and there is that correlation between pain and injury. And in that case, it certainly takes time for the tissue to heal, and this approach can help in that. But then, there's these times where it's not so much damage as it is this kind of overall part of this overall suite of neurological protective patterns. And it's not necessarily about strength in an area, or this being, it's more about that overall reaction.
And so there might be times where we're doing both muscular training and this pattern retraining.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing both in parallel. One other thing too, that I know you and I have talked about before, but we have a protocol. We call it our master reset, or electronic meditation, basically intended to stimulate the vagus nerve, but shifting the body into that parasympathetic dominant state. Part of the perception of threat that leads to the output of pain, it's part of the stress response, part of this response to any sort of stresses or challenges or perceived threats. And so if you can downregulate the overall global stress response and cause a shift out of that fight or flight state into the parasympathetic, the rest and digest, or the feed and breathe state, where the stress response can calm down so the body can focus on long-term growth and repair, that makes a big difference as well. So that's another kind of part of it, is that more global approach.
Mm-hmm. Now, everyone who's listening, I want to remind you that in order to repair, I have to be out of that fight or flight state. I have to be in that parasympathetic state, because that's the only time my cells will take resources and allocate them to the work of repair. Otherwise, if I'm in the fight or flight state, my cells are going to take resources and allocate them to protect me by making me strong to fight or strong to run. I can only heal and repair when I'm in that sense of safety. And I really like doing the master reset. I used to do it after my workouts. I finally realized, no, I should do it just before going to bed. And the quality of my sleep is certainly much better when I take the time to do that. Now, the third area that I inquired about is cognition. And so I'll share with everyone who's listening that when my physical therapist had me first start doing e-stim, what struck me before I was able to see anything with improving my muscle strength was my mood improved. And it's very clear that my mood was better. And I just felt, more mentally clear. And I just really liked doing my e-stim. And so, Garett, I'm going to hand it back off to you to talk about why you think that's going on and what you've observed.
That is such a fascinating area. And the good news in terms of understanding is that we can piggyback on a lot of the well-established research of exercise and brain health. So there's a lot of beautiful work that's been done to show that physical exercise of the body does help the brain. A lot of people say that the reason we have a brain in the first place, or such a large, well-developed brain in the first place, is to control complex movement. And it's interesting. There's these little, kind of jellyfish type creatures that are born and live in the water, and they have a small brain, and then they move to an area like on a coral reef or something like that, whatever, I forget exactly the surface, but they fasten there for the rest of their life, and they actually eat the neurons that form their brain. So when they stop moving, they actually no longer have a need for their brain. So there's this interesting, it's a two-way street, where having a better brain helps us move more, and then moving more helps us, use and reinforce proper brain health. And so there's a lot of benefits. Like, we know that bodily exercise helps increase BDNF, for example, brain-derived neurotropic factor, which helps literally is like fertilizer for brain cells. It can help with neuron regeneration. It can help with stimulating the growth of connections between neurons, which is a large part of how patterns are stored in the brain, and that leads to memory and cognitive function and things like that. And then other growth factors that help with angiogenesis, the growth of new blood vessels and different all this whole kind of host of wonderful growth factors. And then we also see benefits from exercise in the release of neurochemicals like epinephrine, norepinephrine, which it gives us energy, mobilizes that neural energy, like or adrenaline, noradrenaline, gives us that neural energy to be alert and have this cognitive ability and that sense of energy. And then also dopamine and acetylcholine, which give us energy, give us the ability. Dopamine is about pursuit and drive and things like that, and then acetylcholine is about the ability to focus, and that those are released during exercise. And by the way, those three, epinephrine, dopamine, acetylcholine, those three chemicals are the underlying substrates that for neuroplasticity. So if you want to learn something, just a little aside here, if you want to learn something, exercising beforehand and causing the release of those three chemicals opens up this window where you can actually learn something faster and more effectively, because you'll have the chemical substrates for neuroplasticity. But so we know that bodily activity causes these. Just doing any movement at all will cause some of that. If you're doing more more complex movement where you're like putting more weight on the bar for more strength, or you're using movements that require coordination. So it could be, it could be a sport, it could be dance or martial arts, or anything that requires the learning of skills. That also has additional effects on the brain in terms of creating new connections and new remodeling. So just being active kind of creates the environment to reinforce and maintain existing structures, and then you can build new connections as well. And where we come in then with direct current and this technology like the Neubie, by amplifying the neurological input, you get those same benefits of exercise, but amplified like times 2, times 3, times 4. So you get even more of the boost of these neurochemicals that are going to give you, like you talked about, Dr. Walls, the experience of having kind of increased cognition and clarity, help with mood. So we have people that are working with us here at our clinic in Austin, Texas. They'll say, like, clients will say, I've been away for a week. I just landed. I had to come here. I had to get back on the Neubie because it like just kind of helps my mind feel right. And it's not necessarily that people become dependent on it, but getting that boost is just is good for mood, for cognition, and then it's so important for maintaining cognitive function over time, for preventing cognitive decline and triggering, building back up, because there's going to be some natural use it or lose it, right? If use it or lose it tells us that principle tells us that people are going to have cognitive decline over time. If we don't do something to cause some regeneration, it's going to go down instead of up, or at least maintain there. So very, very important to help with longevity and maintaining cognitive function to 120. I know you're going to be sharp at 119. You're going to be publishing papers at 119. I know.
Absolutely. I'm going to have more medical students, more postdocs, more junior faculty. We'll have a large research center here at the university. It will just be so marvelous. Now, this has just been so wonderful. Again, for everyone with MS and other neuroimmune problems, spasticity is difficult to treat, pain is difficult to treat, cognitive decline is also difficult to treat. And exercise, vitally important. The electrical stimulation of muscles can be a very useful adjunct to help manage spasticity, to help treat and resolve and better manage your pain, and to help resolve your issues with cognitive decline. So Garett, where would people come find you, and how would they work with someone who uses Neufit?
So if you're listening to this and you're interested in potentially, trying this out personally, or something about it feels like it may resonate, or something that might be worth trying, I would invite you to go to our website, which is www.neu.fit, neu.fit. And there's a special page, actually, go to neu.fit/walls. And of course, Dr. Walls' last name. Go to new.fit/Walls, WAHLS. And on there, you can find a map of the physical therapists, chiropractors, athletic trainers, other movement professionals that have a Neubie. And if there's someone in your area, we encourage you to go see them. If for some reason there isn't, or it's time or cost prohibitive to go frequently enough, we have ways where our team can remotely support people who get a device to use at home. So that's an option. And then also one other thing, if you go to that website, you'll see there will be dates on there for the MS boot camps that we do. We call them a boot camp. It's a weekend intensive where people can come down to our office in Austin, Texas, and do a 3-day intensive where you would get 2 one-on-one with a physical therapist, 2 treatments per day, and then we'll do a group activity at lunch, a kind of a lunch and learn, or do something, whether it be talking about a certain topic or actually trying something or demonstrating something on the Neubie. And we serve Walls compliant meals, of course, gotta follow the Walls protocol. And those have been so cool because even in those 3 days, virtually everybody, I guess, I don't know if I can say 100%, but 90+% of people going through that, even in just the first weekend, notice some improvements. And it's not like you just flip a switch and someone's in a wheelchair and all of a sudden is running sprints, but people notice changes in pain and spasticity, in cognitive, the things we're talking about today, or motor function, or enhanced sensitivity, or dexterity in their hands or feet or things like that. And many of them, going through that experience are motivated to want to continue. So they either go see the local practitioner, or they choose to rent or purchase one of the devices and continue using it at home. And we can of course support that with custom programs, and then get on video calls like this. We have a staff of wonderful therapists that can support people like that too. So there's a few different ways to interact. If anyone listening is a practitioner, of course, we have a whole certification training program to teach you how you can use this in your practice as well. And there's a link, if you go to our website, there's a link for practitioners that kind of gives more information there.
Okay. Well, Garett, I love doing eSTEM. I love the Neubie, and I love chatting with you. And I really look forward to the next time we get to see each other in person.
Yes, me too. Thank you, Dr. Walls. I love you and your work.
Okay. Now, for all of you who are listening, I invite you to please share below what were the key things that you learned? What are you going to try? And also go to my website, terrywalls.com, and be sure and sign up for the newsletter so you can hear and receive my weekly research updates. Now, much love to you and your family.
You too. Thank you so much.